Welcome to episode 14 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, The Benefits of a Uniform URL Structure, we shared some great tips on how to implement URL consistency and ways to make the argument for doing so. In this episode, we're going to continue that thought process, but focus on product information management and discuss the benefits of managing product information and how we've implemented them with a global viewpoint. But before that, there was a great news article by Chris Long on Search Engine Land titled "Retailers, Google's Becoming Your New Product Category Page." And it shows pictures where Google's showing results almost like in an Amazon style. Have you seen that, Bill?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I think it fits perfectly into our topic today of ways people should organize their product information and images and things like that to maximize this new opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty insane the way you can almost drill down like you would on a website to navigate to the product that you're interested in with, they have categories and meta. You almost don't have to do any research anymore. It can all be done right in the single SERP.
And I think that's brilliant because, this is the kind of thing we've been telling people for years is that as people go through, and I guess I've always called it sort of a searcher continuum, this idea that you start with, and Chris used the example of like espresso machines, right? You could even start with coffee maker and then learn that there's different types of them. And really what, seems like what Google's done is, and interestingly enough, they have the data.
Yeah.
And this is the thing we've been trying to understand is they know what people do. And I just want to segue on this. This is what I said the day after I went to the Bing launch back in the day, that I thought Bing, either they did it manually or they did it automated. They knew all the variations of a particular query. And I think what Google's done now is it's put this in here. And the examples that Chris captured, it had things like, do you want a grinder? Do you want, is it this and that? And sizes, is it automatic? Do you want this? And so, it's essentially taken all the feature function sets and gives you the ability to click them in addition to brands, to sizes, and, all the different attributes. And again, whether this is, I'm not totally, in love with the idea that this is your new category page, but I like the potential of this. Like I've been talking about shelf space for years. And imagine if you've got your act totally wired, could somebody, like in a case of espresso machines like DeLonghi, with many models of feature functions, imagine if they had their act together and their feeds were dialed in and their pages were dialed in and their schema were dialed in, could they dominate this? And if you really, I think another thing that we've told people to do for years is think about this segmentation, this intent clustering, this interest clustering. And I do just, it fits perfectly into our topic today because then he goes in to talk about, there's scrollable product images. You can click in and you get this pop-up block around that product, with descriptions and dimensions, and very conveniently that fits in today's discussion. So if you haven't seen this, I think you should definitely take a look at it. And while some will argue, oh, it's Google, it's this Google disintermediating us. At the end of the day, they're not selling this. They're sending you to some retailer that magically, literally ticked the boxes for this. And I think that's the thing we want to talk about today. Are you doing those things that will allow people to tick the boxes to make you much more findable and discoverable down the road?
Right. And we'll add a link to the show notes so that you can read that article. But you can also search for it. Google is Becoming Your New Category Page by Chris Long. So let's get on with the show. Imagine having all your product info in one place. having consistency across all marketing and sales channels, having all the meta, like the correct product name, description, links to images, sizes, weights, regional availability, target markets. You can even include physical assets like data sheets, exhibit models, even, the giveaways at a trade show. Having all this information in one database ensures consistency. It helps your product info look the same across all platforms. And, this information can be fed into Google Merchant Center. It also helps get products to market quicker by streamlining the process of adding and updating product details to get that to your distributors. There's probably 10 different places in a single organization where these things exist, but they're not all in one place. And someone updates information and it doesn't get updated across the organization. So, Bill, if when you're working with people and they don't have this information organized currently, where would you start and how would you go about thinking of this?
First, I'd start with trying to put a framework in place to organize it, and many people, I think most companies actually have this to some degree, but you nailed it. It's all over the place. I remember I worked with a big company once. I mean, a big, big company. They were in the Fortune 100. And I said, do you have a list of all of your products and product categories? And they're like, I don't know. Maybe. And I just said, the hell with it. I went to Wikipedia and it was to scrape it out of Wikipedia,
Wow.
because it was like pulling teeth. And then a couple months later, we found there are people that have this and organized, but nobody was using it. And that's the first thing I would do. There's a lot of tools out there, and we're not going to talk about specific tools, but if you just Google product information management, you'll see it. And there's two parts to this equation. And we're going to talk about the next one in a future episode about, the digital asset management. So the physical photos. And really today we're just talking about product information. And you nailed the benefits. Instead of people having to go to different files and folders and worksheets and oh my God, how many people have told me, yeah, we had a list of URLs, but somebody went in and changed the Google Doc and broke it all. And many companies, to their credit, may have this totally dialed in a market. But if you ask them, do you have it for France? Do you have it for Japan? Do you have it for Germany? And they're like, I don't know, or no. And even more interesting is, have you connected this? Do you have a master one or a primary one? And then from it, you've got a primary key that connects to other markets. Because when you start to think of it this way, in theory, we should have a way to come in and take a product name or a product ID, and then have a nice little layout that when I click it, if I want this for France, I have it. And this is the stuff you alluded to having in there, right? Models and variations of models, a feature description, tech specs, links out into different product diagrams. If it's technology, having a link to the Visio image for that. When I worked with Cisco, it was insane the number of people that were looking for the Visio image for them to build data center mockups. So those little hooks to things, that little image that you pull into that Microsoft product to build, sort of workflows and those documents.
Oh, I was going to ask you, I'm like, Visio image. What's a Visio image? So you're talking about the icon used in a flowchart.
Yes, an icon in a flowchart.
Okay.
People look for that because they're like, oh, this is the server. And then it was very interesting. Let me segue for a minute. When we did a model, we did a bicycle query. Are we there? Are we represented matrix of about, I don't know, probably 30 million phrases. And we broke them out across that. One of these was build. We come up with a bicycle category called build. And what we found is people were looking for, the specifically Visio image and then like a product name. And Cisco had them. They were literally on an A to Z, 1 to N list that was, probably had to be 50, 60 printed pages long of links, and it was just the product ID. But when you clicked it, it brought up the Visio image, that little thumbnail that they could right click, save, and put into their document. And when we said, when people were looking for this, guess what they're doing? They're building their data center mock-up,
Yeah.
probably to go get budget. And then when the light bulb went off for the people, and they're like, oh my God, we need to get these on the product page. Right. So as we started framing this out, and that's what we said, let's start number one with the category. Right? Is it a server? Is it an Acme super widget? Is it a jacket? Is it a boot? Whatever it is, that's a category. And then we start to stack it out from there. And again, many people have this in some way in a database. Then you can start to fold in things like, as you mentioned, different sizes. Now, wonder if in the United States, we have one SKU, and then in the UK, we have a different SKU. We want to have that UK SKU in. And this is where we start to get into things. If I was setting this up, I would start with things like, first and foremost, a global product ID. And this global product ID is, a primary key in a database. It's a root, alphanumeric, or literally a name that you can use as nothing more than an easy lookup for people to say, okay, this is what it is. And oh, by the way, in 22 markets, there's a different ID or a different SKU, but they're all tied back to the global product ID.
That
And
makes a lot of sense.
interestingly enough, there
I was going to
is a
say that
magical
makes a
name.
lot of sense, especially over the life of the product, because there'll be revisions and things like that. So it won't be the same product, but you want the same ID.
Right. And you can extend on it, right? You can have that root name or root ID number, and you can put a -A or 2 or 3. Here was another thing that we found with Cisco. When they sunset a model, let's say you've got a Cisco 8500 server, right? It's now an 8500-27 or an 8500-G because they were using letters
Mm-hmm.
or numbers for, I think they called it generation. At the end of the day, people are putting in an 8500 server,
Yeah.
right? They don't know what generation it is. They don't know what, maybe they do, but if they're putting in the root name, and then we want to bring them. And what was always interesting is when we would sunset something, all that content would go away. There's never any legacy tieback. I look over my shoulder and it's like, oh, it's an 8500. Or like I remember at IBM, it was AS400, right? It said AS400, but by the time I left IBM, it was, I think, an X series. So we might be calling it an X series, but it's still an AS400 because that's the label that's on the front of it. So things like that, it allows you to maintain state between historical legacy. But if we roll this back to the global level, probably, and we talked last time about URLs and why that was a pain for us with hreflang Builder to match it. And this was one of the recommendations we made with a global product ID, because for hreflang, we have to say the UK page, the US page, the Australian page, the Irish page, these are all equal to each other. And we always recommended using a global ID to map these to each other. And even if they have a different SKU in these markets. Now, it's interesting, I found working on hreflang that many companies, the SKU is created to designate either the markets that it's in, or interestingly enough, the supplier location it comes from. Now, this is
Mm-hmm.
not a UPC. This is their internal designated thing. An interesting fact, if you sell a product globally or in a regional market feed, a regional merchant program at either Google or Amazon, you have to use a global trade item number, a GTIN. And it's, I think, a 14-digit identifier. And it is the normalizer between markets. So In the United States, we might have a 6 or 8 or 9 or 12 digit, UPC or SKU, but the GTIN, you must use it. And what's interesting, we talked about this, I think, a few episodes ago, the amount of money big companies pay to organize their merchant feeds and organize this stuff for other purposes. They don't think about doing it for this purpose. And again, we're simply folding this in. Or what if we had this central management and we could export stuff out? Hey, give me a product feed that meets Google specifications for France.
Yeah.
Give me an export for Amazon in Germany. And it tied all this together.
I give you a little history of my introduction to product management, information management. So I was with a company before it was acquired by Siemens. We acquired 28 different companies in a matter of 3 years. We went from, I don't know, 30 products to like 200 products. And I was responsible for building out the new website. So I had to figure out, how do I organize these things? Because we had products in new categories, we had products in the same category. And we also wanted to make sure that we could figure out how we can get the navigation from the homepage to the right product. And we're talking, way back. So it was mostly, HTML navigation. So we basically broke it down into application, process. So it was problem, use, the category that it would be, and the type of thing that it was filtering. And so it was pretty hard to get everybody to agree on where their product fit, because everybody wanted all their products and all of that stuff.
Right.
But we finally got that done. And then like a year later, the CEO decides to call up the front desk of a couple of the offices and ask for a product not in the office. And they didn't know who they could talk to. And that set the company off on this whole PIM project. It took about 2 years, but they really nailed it down. And the goal, the first goal was basically one call, one answer. And that turned into all the information and storage and all that stuff. So, and now with, Amazon, Walmart, Google, you can use all of that information to get your stuff up.
And I think that's key, right? If somebody were starting today, right? If you're the search person or you're a web manager, I talked to somebody recently that we were talking about him selling his agency, and he was telling me about a client that he was struggling with. They were rebuilding the website, and he was just trying to get all of the products just so that they could build a feed. And like you said, move from an HTML, which they were still using, into the current century and use a dynamic structure. And it was like pulling teeth. When he asked the question, can I get an output of the database? They're like, well, we never output this. We just query it. And the people that were keeping it didn't even know how to get data out because they were used to putting it on a screen. So that's where I would start is, what do we have where, right? Start with trying to aggregate this. And long before you even start seeking out tools, to do this, just what can you start with in Excel? What can you start with in like an easy to use database like Airtable or Notion? Hell, you could probably even take some of these Excel, dump it into Chat GPT, and it would organize it for you. But start collecting this stuff and at least building relationships with people. The logistics team, the people that ship this stuff out, they probably have data. The call center, I love the call center of where do you look up if somebody calls us and wants to know about our products? I remember something so vividly. I was doing a project with Dell, and I remember they were telling me that they really dreaded Mondays because Mondays they would come in, they'd get a half dozen emails from Michael Dell wanting to know why he couldn't find things. And he talked about acquisitions. That was his pet peeve. If they acquired somebody, he immediately wanted to make sure whatever they did, their data set, their product set was in Dell.com site search. because that was the key. Somebody heard, oh, Dell bought them. They come to Dell and it may not be listed on the product or navigation yet, but they will search for it in site search. So
Mm.
all of these bits come together. And as we saw from Chris's article, think about those things, right? What are the features? What are the functions? What are the attributes? And then another thing that I think a lot of, SEOs, like I sort of got scolded the other day by someone by mentioning keywords, and I mentioned keyword, not in keyword research, but words. What do people use to find you? And they're like, well, we don't use keywords anymore. We use entities. Well, sorry, folks, that's still a damn keyword. Maybe your customer hasn't got the memo that are the people that give us the names of the stuff that we do in search, cool people haven't caught up with that yet. So,
Well, and a question isn't an entity. Those are keywords.
exactly. It's a phrase.
Yeah.
But let's talk about entities, right? There is power. And the reason, we've got 40 people now are entity SEO gurus is because they're seeing that, exactly that. Google is using entities, these descriptors of what something is. And there's a dozen tools. Our good friends over at Milestone Internet, they have, Schema Builder, and there's a dozen of these out there where they can crawl your site and find things that you can tag as an entity. Inlinks does a great job of this. Dixon Jones's company being able to do this. So what if we folded that in, right? If we sell computers and laptop computers, those are entities and we can tag them. And guess what? In our database, if we've got a link from this product or this, that it's computer as a category, laptops as a subcategory, guess what? We can now tie that to all of our linguistic equivalents. And the cool thing about that is we could now export a list, especially if we're thinking in terms of our always on keyword list. We can export a list now of all of our category names for every market from this database. And that also allows us to start to look at things creatively around potentially using that as a double check for our schema. So we've got a product and we all want product schema because now as Google was showing, or as Chris was showing in this, Google is showing us things like, I had a cheat sheet here, but it was like prices, we've got price, we've got attributes, we've got shipping, we've got availability. We've got all this that we can now put into this structured format. And we got to get it from somewhere. And I've seen people, even though they have a merchant feed, even though they might have some of this, in a licensing database, I see people trying to construct this from scratch and put it into a JSON file to use for schema.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, like we said, if we're starting from zero, start to chase people down that might have this, and don't reinvent the wheel. Find people that have this. And I once did a project at IBM. The team, received a patent for faceted navigation, and my job as part of this was making sure everything was tagged with these attributes. So we had a category, a subcategory, we had features. And then once we did this on IBM.com, I was loaned out for like 45 days to Samsung to help them do this. And at Samsung, one of the things I had to do is they took it to the nth degree. You could come to Samsung and it would ask you a question, like you talk about questions. What is remember back in the day, well, maybe not that long ago, where everybody had these TV cabinets?
Yeah.
The wooden TV cabinets before we had it mounted on the wall because
Yeah.
TVs were too heavy to put on the wall.
The two towers with the base between them.
Yeah, and you'd have books over here,
Yeah,
or
right.
because we had to have our speaker system, we had those. There was a feature that was insanely popular on Samsung. What is the dimensions of the TV slot for your cabinet? And you could measure that and put those dimensions of that square in the tower and say, Here's the list of TVs that would fit those dimensions.
Oh, so it was a filter.
It was a filter.
Oh,
And it
nice.
was one of the many facets. And that's how you come in. What type of TV do you want? You want plasma, you want LCD, do you want
Yeah.
flat screen? And and the thing is that we ended up with 100 million possible combinations to build URLs. And so we had to reverse that and build rules to say we have cat, subcat, feature, all those filters, like you were saying, so that we didn't end up with 100 million URLs. It ended up being about 1 million, but because those URLs, those pages didn't exist, they needed basically a series of factors to call them. We used to build the list both for the lookups as well as, well, the lookups were A plus B plus C plus D in the facets or the filter configurator. But we had to do that for XML sitemaps to feed it into Google because Google, guess what, doesn't have clickability.
Right.
It can't come in and say, I want this, 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 and this, and build a URL. So we had to reverse the process. And because we knew that we wanted, we built these work streams that's here's all of our category lists. So it was category, subcat, subcat, and then products were attribute, 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 product ID. And because we knew those rules, we could build URLs that we actually put in to the XML sitemap. So a lot of companies may already have some of this done for you. And that's why we say go ask people. And imagine if you could start to combine this. And then, like we said, can you share this in markets? And I think we talked before, one of the big problems if you have licensees. So if you're a company like Brooks Brothers, I think we mentioned, Brooks Brothers will license Brooks Brothers and all things Brooks Brothers to a country. And that country, the licensee may or may not use all the products, but the ones that they do use, they need a way to call them out of the database. And we
Yeah.
need a way to map these pages for hreflang. We need a way to map things for analytics. We need a way to do it. So there's so many reasons that we could benefit from this. And like in your experience, you said it took a couple years to get all this organized. And so I don't want that to scare people away, but I want people to really start to think about what are 5 things that we can merge today.
Yeah.
And
And to be clear, that was, I mean, they took that on and they kept bolting onto it. So it ended up actually being used in a customer relationship management system. And, so if a sales guy went in and they tagged the product they were going to sell, it would pop up all the PDFs. I was part of the team, but I don't want to take credit. I was kind of on the edges of the thing for the web, but they took that and they basically bolted it right into the business. It was really good, saved a lot of time. It was an awful lot of work, but saved a lot of time going forward. Hey, before we continue, we're talking about mapping out your categories and things, but I did a quick search on Google for espresso machine. And one of the things that I would do is actually do that when you're starting to build your list. As an example, they have filters, get it by a certain date. Is it on sale? Is it used for commercial use with the grinder, automatic, with the steam wand? So if you had only one product in a certain category, you would still want to say it had a grinder, it had a steam wand, all that kind of stuff. And then they have the obvious stuff, prices and automatic, manual, brand.
And many
But
of those are schema, right? Like, is it on sale? Is it new or used? Is it the price? Those things are all there in schema. And so again, if you fold that back into your product information sheet, you have that. So I think that's brilliant. And even if you're stuck, I think another cool thing, it just popped into my mind. If you don't have anything, go to Google and see what Google's already done for you,
yeah,
right? Because just like you said, there's usually some pills across the top of key categories. Like if you put in coffee maker, it's probably going to be coffee maker, it's going to be pour over, it might be, different attributes. So you can start to see some of that. And then as you drill deeper, they've probably done a good job of segmenting this already by this, because anybody that's come before you or even their own data set, they know what these entities are.
Yeah.
Again, why has entity SEO become so cool is because they've been doing this classification of stuff forever. And then once you peg it to a category or one of these classifications, it really takes the ambiguity out of it. And I think the power of this is as we start to take this international, like I forget the exact name of the element in schema. It's product category. It's like alternate category or something like that. And I've seen people use that on their international pages
Same
because
as.
same as,
Yeah.
and then I know that's for social media. And then same as, because guess what? What is the French, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Belgian, or the German maybe language equivalent of those? So you can
Mhm.
start to frame those up. And guess what? If you have them in your database, it's easy to populate. So again, start small, even let, the Google figure this out for you, some of these key things. But I think this is not going to slow down. And especially as we start to find ways to use AI to better do this, to understand whether it's search or intent or product demand or availability, just so that you don't have to look in 40 places, starting to aggregate this together. And sort of a teaser for when we start to talk about the DAMs, the digital asset management. Google's got APIs now that will actually tell you what an image has, how friendly the image is, even to the point of, is there, what's the connotation? What's the ethnicity? What is the expression? All of these things get really powerful. And then we start to think about sizing, because now with a lot of products, you can have multiple sizes for carousels. And as you know, you're very familiar with around recipes, having different sizes. So all these things start to make sense when we can aggregate it and manage it more efficiently. And you fold in machine translation memory, because if you change the description in, let's say, English, that should flag translation management in other markets that they've updated the description, they've added a new feature function. And I think these feature functions and attributes and claim to fame, whatever we want to call them, these are going to be critical, because if you look at a lot of the generated results in Google, it's often scraping these bullet points, not just from your page, but from other people who've reviewed it. These, that give the
Yeah.
sound bites of what it is. So again, I think many, many things we can do with this. Our recommendation is, look, what do we have already aggregated? What more can we fold in? And then how do we start bundling it across the globe? So, yeah, start small, aggregate, and iterate as you go. And then to Bill's point, where else in your business can you use this? Maybe it's awesome for person answering a phone and they can put in an ID or a name and see that you actually have this product in multiple places.
Yeah. And I like the idea of, just start. I think there's a lot of time to be saved if you could just map your website stuff, like, how many people know where their images are for a specific product. Is the image okay for one market and not another market, or do you have market specific images? And, like, let's say one little thing changes, maybe the weight changes, and now you got to figure out where that information is in all your PDFs. So yeah, good just to get started. But looking forward, I just read a stat. I was, doing some research for this. I just read a stat. Amazon, Grainger, and Target changed their product requirements more than 100 times in 2022. So it's really important that your system's flexible. And maybe the requirement was their tag. Maybe the requirement was something became mandatory. It could have been the length of a description, but this stuff is coming at us. We need to start thinking about it.
Yeah, no, and you got to get started somewhere. And
Yeah.
I think what's nice, again, if you've got a data set, and one of those stats changes, you can go in, change it in one, it flags all the others. Weights and prices, a lot of these, the actual PIM management systems, if you're using one, will often have calculations. So if you went into, and like you said, the weight's a great one. If you put in the weight and that's the product being sold everywhere, they have calculators that automatically will update the weight field in every market, changing it from, pounds to grams or kilograms or, the different calculation just because you entered it in one point. As long as it's the same product, you can dynamically do that. But good stuff. I think, it's only going to get more complex, more demanding, and just get out there and start. And I think that's the kind of thing we're seeing more and more people looking for help and guidance around trying to do this. And whether you need to build a cost benefit analysis around this, or you just need to, do a crayon drawing for the MBAs in the room on why we need to organize this, wherever it is, just get started somewhere.
Yeah. Good stuff. I think you've wrapped this up nicely. I want to remind everybody about our Facebook group where you can join and ask questions and we'll answer them. Also, if you like what you hear, I would really appreciate it if you would go into your podcast listener and give us a rating. Appreciate everybody that's listening, and I want you guys to have a great day and stay safe. Bill, any final words?
No, I think it's good. Yeah, I concur that, go out there and just get it done.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just want to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.